Early on, the Catholic Church resisted the NSDAP on moral grounds, and the state recognized the potent threat posed by the Church. For instance, the Nazis viewed Cardinal Pacelli, later Pope Pius II, as Jew-loving. Of the 44 speeches Pacelli gave in Germany as Papal Nuncio between 1917 and 1929, 40 denounced some aspect of the emerging Nazi ideology. In 1932, all the Catholic bishops met at Fulda to create a document explaining their official views regarding the emerging party. The first document of this party forbid membership of the party among Catholic bishops. On November 12, 1937, the Kulturkampf newsletter lauded the positive consequence of the Catholic resistance against the Third Reich, noting that its ability to push back against the party went against all expectation, end quote. The newsletter continued to extol the growing solidarity of all Christians as opposed to totalitarianism. Although, as of April 7th of 1936, Catholics were kept under strict surveillance and all of their traditional processions, pilgrimages, and public events were prohibited, Catholics received moral support from courageous sermons by a significant number of defiant German bishops preaching their opposition to the National Socialist Party. Particularly, writers of the newsletter, as well as other German bishops, feared the Third Reich's campaign of extermination against the Church and the Catholic worshiping community, and the regime's rejection of Christianity, its doctrines, and its morality. While Catholics opposed the NSDAP for numerous religious, economic, and political reasons, it is critical to note that many Catholic clergy were initially suspicious of Nazism because they saw Nazi ideas as anti-Christian, especially the emphasis on race and blood and the obvious disrespect for human life. Some priests have refused to administer the sacrament of communion to church members in stormtrooper or SS uniforms. Therefore, Catholics were largely morally opposed to the ideas laid out in the 25-point platform that Protestants and the general populace not only ignored, but supported. Perhaps the most significant evidence of the vast differences between the Catholic and Protestant response to the NSDAP lie in the response of the radical party to these groups themselves. For instance, a 1936 newsletter in the Kulturkampf, a Catholic newsletter, spoke to the arrests and punishments of ecclesiastics continuing unceasingly. One point recognized the efforts to defame the Catholic clergy through party propaganda and the Nazi press and the party's instruction to prosecute cases of alleged decency. These strategic, expensive, and expansive efforts to turn the public sympathies firmly against the Catholic Church affirm the perceived threat of the Catholic Church. In stark contrast, prominent National Socialists Alfred Rosenberg and others belonged to the Protestant Church as of 1936. Clearly, Catholic ideology and its associated praxis were not only starkly unaligned with the vision and goals of the Nazi state, the state reacted to their perceived collective power. Moreover, recent scholarship in this field has found that although the Catholic Church signed a series of concords with Hitler in 1933, this pact was not seen as an approval of the NSDAP by the Church. Rather, it was a strategic way to prevent the further persecution of Catholics and even subvert the state. As documented by the International Raoul Wallenberg Foundation, of the 500 houses of life, which were safe houses for Jews during the war, found the overwhelming majority were institutions related to the Catholic Church, including convents, monasteries, boarding schools, and hospitals. The Church of Warsaw was actually named a House of Life in 2017. This is the same district where capital punishment could be administered for simply purchasing a Jew's wares, and Catholics were providing refuge for Jews fleeing persecution. Therefore, the concord signed between the Catholic Church and the state was neither dismissal of the plight of Jews nor an acceptance of the radical actions of the state. For many, it was simply the political safeguard necessary to undertake incredibly subversive and radical forms of defiance. However morally contestable the Catholic Church is and was, there exists a strong sense of unity and hierarchy in church leadership, which clearly differentiates itself from the Protestant Church. As a representation of God on earth, the Pope represents a powerful spiritual leader. Therefore, political leaders may not possess a strong pull with the Catholics as a moral or personal guide. In stark contrast, Protestantism is notable for its lack of a rigid spiritual hierarchy besides the moderate local authority of elders, deacons, and pastors. Therefore, the appearance of a charismatic figure that utilized quasi-religious language and symbols to highlight his own authority was readily gripped onto and supported by Protestant Germans. Hans Kerrl, the Reich's Protestant minister for church affairs, even stated, Adolf Hitler is the true Holy Ghost. Although Catholics and Protestants are members of the same spiritual body of the Christian faith, the former group were able to garner a much more cohesive response to the perceived ethical failings of the NSDAP, even before the genocidal violence of the party became a reality. In stark contrast, Protestants tended to react to the party with largely unwavering support or, rarely, opposition that culminated in a few assassination attempts on Hitler. Their vast differences in their abilities to mobilize a coordinated reaction to the party speaks to the many variances between the groups. These variations hinge on the lack of an institutionally established, hierarchical, and authoritarian church leadership able to guide the lives of believers. The long 20th century was a stunning example that the innate needs of mankind are, indeed, irrational and unenlightened. The darkest center of humanity seems untouched by the glowing light of scientific progress and ethical humanism. However, amidst these dark times, there are groups of individuals who, understanding the repercussions, assisted Jews as part of a widespread, institutionally backed response to the moral threat of the NSDAP. The Catholic Church was effectively able to shield future victims of state-sponsored genocide. Their subversive state resistance demonstrates the criticality of communal action and support in opposing a violent and oppressive regime. Thank you.